Hi, I am Fethiye Irmakdoğan, and I will present our work on asking follow-up clarifications to resolve ambiguities in human-robot conversation. While comprehending natural language instructions, the robot needs to identify the described objects in the user's request. However, while identifying these objects, ambiguities might happen because of unknown or similar objects in the environment. For instance, in this example, when the user asks to pick up the green vegetable, the request fits multiple objects in the scene. In these cases, instead of asking users to repeat their requests over and over again, the robot needs to find an efficient way to ask for follow-up clarifications. For example, in this scene, the robot can ask which one, the one in the pink bowl or on the cutting board. In this paper, we aim to address this challenge. To describe objects, people use referring expressions. And these are the expressions describing objects with their distinguishing features, such as color, shape, or other object properties. While comprehending referring expressions, an interactive clarification process has been shown to improve resolving ambiguities. Also, there have been promising attempts to disambiguate the described objects. Although there are some attempts for interactive clarification, most of the studies still ask users to repeat their request in case of uncertainties. In these cases, if the user repeats the same expression, the robot can't receive new information about the target object, and this might lead to task failures. Also, studies aiming to disambiguate objects have assumed that candidates in the environment are given, or they can be detected or localized by existing methods. Lastly, previous studies didn't partially grant from the information that the robot could understand from the instructions. In this example, if the robot is not familiar with the vegetable concept, but it has encountered green items before, it can still look for a green object in the environment. To address these limitations, we suggest an interactive and autonomous system to generate follow-up clarifications, both for detectable and undetectable instances, using the known objects in the environment and understood part of the user request. Here is an overview of our system. For a given scene and object description, we first find the candidate scene regions. Secondly, we obtain the detectable objects using an object detector. And then we determine whether the request is ambiguous. If there are any ambiguities, we generate a yes-no clarification question. Now, we will go through each of these components. Firstly, we find the candidate scene regions using a method leveraging explainability. In this method, for a given scene and object description, we obtain the activation heat map using the image captioning module of the GradCam explainability method. This method takes the gradient of the captions log probabilities, and in our task, these captions correspond to the user's expressions. Then, we compute the number of unconnected active areas in the heat map, and use these numbers in k-means clustering to cluster the heat map activations. Finally, we suggest the clusters with the highest activations as the most probable target object regions. For example, in this scene, when the user asks for the green vegetable, the two candidate regions will include the Brussels sprouts and the kale. After finding the candidate scene regions and obtaining the detectable objects in the scene, we determine whether the request is ambiguous. To achieve this, we first parse the user expression and find the set of specified objects. In this example, the green vegetable and the apple are contained in this set. Then, we count the number of candidate regions containing objects from this set. If there is only a single region, we assume that the expression is unambiguous. Otherwise, we label the expression as ambiguous. If there are ambiguities, we generate the follow-up question using the spatial relations between the candidate regions and detectable objects. To generate the follow-up questions, we first find the spatial relations between the candidate regions and detectable objects using a relation presence network. Then we provide these relations to the relation informativeness network, which finds the most informative spatial relation describing each candidate region. By describing these regions, we generate follow-up questions for each candidate. For instance, for the first candidate in this example, the robot asks whether the green vegetable is to the left of the knife. If the system receives an affirmative response to the clarification question for a candidate region, we select this candidate as the target region. To obtain the target object from this region, we check whether the target object is detectable. If it is detectable, we compute the Euclidean distances between the detected objects and the target region, and select the closest detected object as the target one. Otherwise, we obtain the target object by providing this region to a transformer space network. To evaluate our method, we conducted a user study. We asked people to describe objects on the table to the Pepper robot, and the robot aimed to identify these objects. Our experiment had two conditions. In the control condition, when there were ambiguities, the robot asked users to describe the object again, as in many previous applications. But in the clarification condition, the robot asked follow-up questions to resolve these uncertainties. 63 participants interacted with the robot in the study. It was within subject design with two different setups. People described 6 objects per setup, and the object order was provided to the participants. The starting condition was counterbalanced, and the robot asked at most 2 clarifications or 2 object redescriptions for each object. Now, we will watch a short video clip from the study.
The bottle next to the knife.
Can you describe the object again?
The bottle next to the knife. The spoon on the right side of the table.
Is the spoon to the right of the bottle from your viewpoint?
Yes.
Check the red box on my tablet to see whether it is the object you described.
Yes, it is.
Here are our results. Firstly, we observed that the robot could find the described objects more often when it asked for clarifications. As you see, the number of correct trials was more in the clarification condition. Also, unknown trials, where the robot couldn't suggest any objects after 2 clarifications or 2 object redescriptions, were less in the clarification condition. Secondly, we observed that the robot could find the described objects with fewer conversational turns in the clarification condition. Just after the initial request, when the request is unambiguous, the number of cases is similar in both conditions, and this was expected. But once there were uncertainties, the robot could find the described objects more often in its first and second attempts in the clarification condition. Moreover, people perceived the task as easier when the robot asked for follow-up questions. And they also thought that the robot could understand their instructions better and its competence was higher in the clarification condition. Lastly, we computed a similarity score when people described the same object again in the control condition. And our results revealed a high similarity. This indicates that people mostly didn't provide new information about the target object while redescribing. But this information could be obtained with clarification questions. To conclude in this paper, we propose an autonomous system to resolve ambiguities, using the understood part of the user request and also utilizing the known objects in the environment. Our results show that asking follow-up clarifications helps to find correct object more often with fewer attempts, and it improves people's perception of the task and the robot. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or comments, please contact us.